After the war, the Allies said, well, it's over. We won. Now it's time to bury the dead properly. Because during the war, you kind of were buried where you fell and people recorded it. So each different country created a team, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission were formed, and they were in charge of monuments and cemeteries. Lieutenant Colonel Nangle, who was the Padre for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment during the First World War, he's been put in charge of the commemorations and the reburials of Newfoundlanders.
And he was a pretty powerful guy, because when he came back in 1919 to Europe, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and the Exploits Memorials had basically finished their work, and the decisions were made and the time limit was over. And Nangle screamed, "Hang on, this is unfair. I'm here now representing that little place in the North Atlantic that was so far away that so many of us gave the ultimate sacrifice." And they listened to him, and he put forward a recommendation of having the 5 Caribou memorials on the Western Front, 1 in Belgium, 4 in France, and he also suggested to put a Caribou memorial in Gallipoli at the site that he thought of the Caribou Hill. So Nangle wanted then to put one in Turkey at the time. He used the term the Trail of the Caribou as his theme for those memorials.
He recommended 6 caribous. He recommended 1 in Belgium, in Courtrai or Courtric, 4 in France, which would be the main one at Beaumont-Hamel, Goudencourt, Montchy-le-Preux, and in a town called Manière, which was commemorate the Battle of Cambrai, and 1 in Gallipoli.
He did a special trip back to Gallipoli in March of 1921 to deal with the conditions of the graves that were there, and I think he wanted to solidify his thought on the Gallipoli Memorial. So he still had it in his mind when he left England in March of 1921 that he was still going to recommend the Caribou for Caribou Hill.
Right after this, when Nangle goes back, there's a lot of unrest in Turkey. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission people start getting attacked.
One of the factors was the Turkish War of Independence from 1919 to 1924, which created, particularly in the Gallipoli Peninsula, a fair amount of turmoil. The memorial at Cape Hells was unveiled in 1924, and the memorial at Chanakbar was unveiled in 1925. And shortly thereafter, the Commonwealth War Graves, as an entity, because of problems with safety of their workers and vandalism, they ended up being forced to leave the peninsula entirely.
The Commonwealth War Graves work out an agreement with the new leader of Turkey, which is Mustafa Kemal. And for some reason, Newfoundland does not send a representative, and the main monument now becomes a British monument, and the Newfoundlanders never went back and never thought about it or couldn't afford it. And the Caribou in Gallipoli is never mentioned again until, 10 or 15 years ago, when they started talking about it in Newfoundland, saying, why isn't there one? Even though there wasn't a monument in Gallipoli for over a century, Newfoundlanders did not forget those who fought and in so many cases fell in Gallipoli. In 1965, Premier Smallwood led a delegation with several veterans to Gallipoli in commemoration of the 50th anniversary there.
After the ship the Caribou had docked, the Premier of Newfoundland, accompanied by Sir Leonard Outerbridge and the Honourable Miles Murray, came ashore, followed by the veterans of the regiment. Colonel O'Driscoll, Major Butler, Captain Hicks, George Parsons, Bernard Forsey, Charles Parsons, Albert Delaney, Ron Martin, Captain Sidney Frost. They were greeted by town officials and a guard of honor composed of Turkish soldiers dressed in the uniforms of 1915. The reception in Gallipoli was friendly and warm, and when it was over, the Newfoundland party started out across the peninsula towards the cemeteries of Suvla. They soon found themselves in old farm carts drawn by tractors that brought them through the old battlefields and villages that haven't changed in hundreds of years. And on one occasion, they also found themselves stuck, but this was quickly remedied. At one place, a sapper's tunnel and a trench were preserved. At Hill 10 Cemetery, there were 8 Newfoundland graves. Premier Smallwood placed flowers on each of the Newfoundland markers. As they stopped, they read the names on the stones, and the memories returned, and they recalled the night they landed 50 years before.
I especially remember a friend of mine, Roper. He was killed. He was shot through the neck, and I remember helping bury him.
They shall not grow old as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we shall remember them.
In 2015, the Regimental Advisory Council led a trip there for the 100th anniversary of the battle. And in 2019, the Trail of the Caribou Research Group led a pilgrimage there as well. Discussions of a caribou in Gallipoli began to resurface in earnest after the regiment's pilgrimage to Beaumont-Hamel and France and Flanders for the 90th anniversary of Beaumont-Hamel. It seemed to rekindle an interest and to rejuvenate a province to the memory of the men and women who served in World War I.
It began with our organization sometime back in around 2007, 2008, and officially adopted as one of our mandates in 2009. In 2012, after I joined the RAC, I had gone to Gallipoli to provide a report to the RAC on suitable locations for Caribou Monument in Gallipoli. Myself and a couple other members of the RAC began working and providing information and books to Turkish diplomats to try to help them understand why it was so important for this to be given the go-ahead. And then Perry Trimper was asked to go over, and at the time he was Speaker of the House.
While we were touring the site, actually, it happened that I was with Ismail Kajdemir, a very prominent individual on the Turkish side who really helped to make this all a success. He oversees the battlefield. He's responsible for it. And we were coming off the Asmak Cemetery. He said to me suddenly, he said, Perry, he said, would your caribou fit on this little piece of land right here at the side of this Asmak Cemetery, which was British land? And he said, you know, if the British would agree, we wouldn't oppose. You could put your caribou monument up there. And I thought, wow, you know, finally, these are words we've been waiting for a long time for our country, for our province to hear. But he said, you know, we have one other suggestion. So we went over to Hill 10 Cemetery. And there, Ismail said to me, there's a triangle of land that extends off from the cemetery. And he said, Perry, there's a piece of land here. This is Turkish land. However, we'd be very proud to host your monument there. What would you think about that? So these are words that still send up shivers in my soul. Several days later, we found ourselves in Istanbul, and now I'm meeting with Minister Kurtulmus, who is the head of tourism and culture for the whole country of Turkey, and excellent discussions with him. And he said, Perry, let's talk about whether we could do this or not. And we moved the interpreters aside. I went around the table. There was sort of a Canadian and a Turkish delegation, and he and I sat and talked a lot about the history of Newfoundland, how we came to this point, how important that conflict was for us, how important it was for us to complete the Trail of the Caribou. That night, following the discussions with Kurtulmus, the handshake, he said he would follow it up with a letter confirming that the agreement, that the door was open, that we could actually proceed to do this. I called the Premier, and I said, Premier, they've said yes. And it was amazing and remarkable for us both to share that excitement on the phone. The Turks were also saying, you know, do you have one of these monuments left? And I said, well, there's 5 deployed in Western Europe. There's one that sits at Bowring Park in St. John's. Maybe we could use that one. So I asked the Premier that night, I said, what would you think of the citizens of St. John's and the people of Newfoundland and Labrador? Would they agree to just move that monument over? And he slowed me down immediately. He said, there's too much emotional contact with that statue behind us. But he said, we could make a copy.
We reached out to Turkish officials and for some guidance. And they suggested a contractor that they dealt with, and they're the ones that did the construction. and they knew the ins and outs of how we needed to proceed, what documentation we were going to need, because we were just given a project with no blueprint, permits, or anything to move forward. So the statue was done at a Turkish bronze foundry, and they do mostly garden ornaments, but they do large ornaments for Middle Eastern clients. And when we reached out to them, we had been given a LiDAR scan of the Caribou in Bowring Park to use as the base in which to build a 3D model in a computer, which then would be printed on 3D printers. So this is the actual size of the Caribou. This is the real deal.
When they finally did manage to get the Caribou mounted on its pedestal here in Gallipoli, unfortunately COVID intervened and nobody was here from Newfoundland but one person who happens to work for a mining company in Turkey, and he was there, a Newfoundlander. But otherwise there were no Newfoundlanders here officially to represent the people who fought, and so it's important to us as descendants of those people to be here for the dedication and commemoration.
So I thought it was important that somebody be there on the 20th, because that's when we landed. So we were all there, we're all in our trip shirts, and people had a chance to just visit the Caribou and be there by themselves, even though they were with a group. Ruth played the last post. She was the first person to play the last post at all 7 Caribous. And then we all had that little drink, right? And then we gave the Caribou a drink. This ceremony was about what happened there and the men who had served there, and it was quite well done. The speeches were on point. The Premier's speech was amazing.
Today we officially complete the Trail of the Caribou and honor the efforts and sacrifices of the Newfoundland Regiment in Gallipoli.
Bugün burada savaşlarda hayatını kaybeden Newfoundland askerleri için Kanada tarafından yaptırılan Caribou anıtının açılışı için birlikteyiz.
The ceremony included everybody. There were members from all levels of government. There were members from the Turkish government. We got to lay a wreath and look at the fantastic jobs the kids did. The commitment to remember, read by children. My daughter, Helen, read that. You know, how cool is that?
To them we pledge amid the winds of time to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them.
I found it really funny that they were asking me, like a 14-year-old, not even at the time I was 13, to just do this super, super important thing. And that made me feel like it's hard to put into words.
March! Right! Form!
I wondered in my mind about Thomas Nangle, and in the afterlife, if he was looking down upon that ceremony, what would he be thinking? I feel that he would be an awful, happy, proud Newfoundlander to see that Caribou go there, because I think he would say this is where the Trail of the Caribou began, and that he used that quote, the Trail of the Caribou, and Thomas Nangle would indeed be a happy person to see that in Gallipoli, where our boys are buried.
Kept looking up towards Caribou Hill all through the whole thing and remembering that that's where they were. And just, I hope they can see their caribou. I hope they can.
When the band struck up Let Me Fish Off Cape St. Mary's, then I remembered that the little fishing villages that were decimated by this war. And so I felt
take a picture of me and my dad?
so proud, so privileged to be here.
There's lots of stories out there about bravery and heroism and young soldiers. Like, there was one that turned 14 in the trenches here. Just that every story is important. Every story is important. We laid a wreath wherever we went. Lancashire Landing, Asmack Cemetery, Pink Farm Cemetery, Green Hill Cemetery, Hill 10, the Blockhouse, Caribou Hill, Kangaroo Beach. Everywhere we went, we laid a wreath.
Private George Samuel Knight, Newfoundland Regiment. Enlisted, St. John's, September 7th, 1914, age 21.
Part of the ceremony at each grave was not just laying the wreath, but we said their name out loud. And that was really important because nobody ever says their name out loud anymore. But we took a beach rock from Newfoundland and they couldn't come home, so we brought a bit of home to them and we put it in there. And we did that 25 times on each soldier's grave. We played the ode, sang by Corporal Harvey from the Newfoundland Regiment Band, and we read the Act of Remembrance.
At 19 years of age, a young man from Bonavista who was a bank clerk. He was killed in action a few months later on November 27th, 1915.
I think that kept what going through my mind at every ceremony was McCrae's poem. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. And that's what kept going through my mind every time we did one of those ceremonies. The torch has been thrown to us now to retain their memories.
165, Private Samuel Thomas Lodge. He served in the Newfoundland Regiment and enlisted at St. John's on September 2nd, 1914. His age was 23.
Private Lodge was just a regular infantry like everyone else. But he was a large individual, just a large, gentle giant, a caring soul. Everyone in the regiment loved this man. Usually when you hear comments that you hear that a friend died, work goes on and they continue talking. But when he passed, for the next whole day, the regiment was silent because everyone loved him so much.
And we all know the Act of Remembrance ends with, we will remember them.
They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
In Commonwealth war graves, but they don't have them in Turkey, there's a book that you sign when you were there, right? And every time I go, I sign the book. And that's usually my last thing is I sign the book and it say, you know, I was here, I'm a Newfoundlander. And I close the little gate in the book. There's a little alcove for the book. And you can't do that in Turkey. So what I do in Turkey is I just close the gate and I look into the fields and I just say, thank you.
When sun rays crown thy pine-clad hills, and summer spreads her hand, when silvern voices tune thy rills, we love thee, smiling land. We love thee, we love thee, we love thee, smiling land. As loved our Father, so we love. Where once they stood, we stand. Their prayer
So the 7th Caribou is in Gallipoli. And is it the last Caribou? I don't know. There might be other reasons to make another one. There might be other conflicts. There might be other information come up. You don't know.